Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 10 of Now We're Getting Somewhere. Today I wanted to share with you an interview that I did recently with my former client, Matt Bruner. I know that I have been sharing several stories recently. I just finished sharing a 2-episode series of my story, and now I'm sharing Matt's story. But I really felt drawn to sharing Matt's story this week because I think it's something that a lot of you can probably relate to. When I first met Matt, he told me that he was exhausted and burnt out and just very dissatisfied with his job. In fact, he told me in our initial consultation that he'd actually already decided to quit. It was just a matter of when. And then over the course of our time together, he made huge changes in his work habits and his thoughts to such a degree that by the time we were done, he told me that he didn't feel that he had to quit anymore. He just wasn't burnt out anymore. He had a bunch more free time. His job was much more sustainable in terms of hours and energy. And it was such a cool, dramatic turnaround to be at the point where you can actually just evaluate your job on its own merits. You know, do I want to stay because I like this job? I don't have to quit just because I'm exhausted. So I wanted to share this interview because I know that so many of you are in a similar boat. You're tired and burnt out and working too many hours at your job. And Matt has a bunch of insights that I think will be helpful to you on this topic and of course on a bunch of others too, because he's just a really thoughtful and deep guy. And I also wanted to share this interview at this moment because in 2 weeks, I will be announcing something very special to help those of you who would also like to work fewer hours at work and to do so without sacrificing work quality, just like Matt did. You know, I think so many of us are really craving the holy grail of work-life balance where we know that we're doing excellent work because that matters to us, but we can also enjoy our lives and feel relaxed and spacious. So that is what I'm going to be offering something to help you with. So like I said, I'll be announcing that in 2 weeks, but if it sounds interesting, I wanted to give you a heads up so that you can make sure you're on my email newsletter, which you can get on at katieseifer.com, and you can look out for an announcement in your inbox about that in the next 2 weeks. So without any further ado, here is my interview with Matt.
Okay, so I wanted to start out by just chatting about anything you would like people to know about you or like what you feel is like relevant information about who you are.
Sure. Well, my name is Matt Bruner. I worked in corporate marketing for 10 years. Started at the bottom, worked my way up to a VP role where I worked for the last 2 years. Worked on big clients and small clients and everything sort of in between. Managed large teams, managed small teams. Had a lot of sort of fulfillment and enjoyment and energy doing that. And that sort of led me to a career in coaching, which I've been doing now for the past year plus. I'm an ACC certified coach through the ICF. And I worked with about 20 clients this past year, all from marketing backgrounds and creative backgrounds, helping them get better at their jobs, feel like they're contributing in their roles, deriving value from that, as well as fulfillment and feeling engaged with their work and finding balance sort of between their work and their personal lives.
That's great. I love it. I love that you're a coach now. So I wanted to talk about like the journey that you took in our time together from the marketing executive to becoming a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Like, take me through, I'd love to start at the beginning, sort of even before you reached out. Like, how were you feeling in your life or thinking about your life at that point in time?
Yeah. Well, it was not good, Katie. I was not having a lot of fun in my job towards the end there. In fact, so much so that I decided I was already going to leave. I just didn't know what I was going to do yet. I didn't know what else I liked to do or what I thought I could even be good at. So I had was planning on leaving in like a year around the time I contacted you, and was just working on saving money for that jump, whatever it intended to be. I mean, burnout was like the definition, you know.
Yeah.
I was working long hours unnecessarily, was exhausted, had let go of many of the activities and routines I like to do, things I liked, but also ways I took care of myself. I was thinking about work endlessly, also unnecessarily. Uh,
Mm.
was like couldn't sleep, was eating at my desk through lunch, wasn't taking breaks, all these unhealthy sort of behaviors around my job, but not actually moving anything forward. Like I really just wasn't making progress or feeling even like I was making progress. It was like I was just spinning my wheels, but working as hard as I could to do that, to go nowhere. So I mean that kind of sets the table for it was like, man, I need some help. I need to get out of this.
And did you realize at the time, because you're so self-aware and thoughtful about this, did you realize at the time you're like, this thinking is not helping me, these actions are not helping me? Or did it feel like, no, this is what I have to do to be really good at my job?
I think I thought that's what I needed to do.
Yeah.
Me saying like doing this stuff unnecessarily, yeah, that wasn't me like at the time. I
Yeah.
only have that language and that awareness for it now. At the time, I was just like, man, like work just sucks. That was the only language I had for it at the time. It's
Yeah.
like I'm working hard as I can, and work just
Yeah.
sucks, and that was it.
Well, I'm laughing because I think, I'm recording this season on the podcast. Like, I think probably a lot of people can relate to that. Just like work
Hmm.
sucks. I'm always doing it all the time. Like,
Hmm.
there's no other option to
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
versus like I'm eating at my desk. I don't have time for things I like.
Say I suspect that's true too, because we don't really value. I mean, as a culture, it's not very prevalent to value that there's an alternative to working like that, right? I mean, you're starting to hear about it now, in the news and with these buzz terms, burning out and quiet quitting and all that stuff, and like
Yeah.
that's good or bad for some folks, and so I think it's becoming more popular and is becoming like more part of the public awareness, but overall, I would say most people just tend to work like that.
Yeah. And feel like, well, this is all there is.
Hmm.
Yeah. So you reached out to me. What were your thoughts before we even talked about like what you thought life coaching was going to be like? Had you worked with a coach before? Like what
Hmm.
was that going through your brain at that point
Yeah,
in time?
sure. I hadn't worked with a coach before in another, form. Like I've been to therapy, plenty of times for many years, and had hit or miss-ish sort of experiences with therapy. I kind of walked out of therapist's office with nothing to do, it felt like. And I always ended up leaving that relationship feeling like I didn't even know if I accomplished anything. That
Mm.
was just me and my set of circumstances and my experience. But looking at coaching, I was skeptical because I had sort of a connotation about coaches as people with enormous Instagram followers and, spending lots of money and taking private jets and Tony Robbins and having to do it
Mm.
with other people and lots of
Hmm.
like intensity and stuff. And that is just not how I like live or communicate or learn or interact well is with too many of those things.
Yeah.
Um, I remember when I found you, I signed up for your newsletter. And what hooked me at that point was one of your pieces on, I think, the reality of, and this is my language, this is what I took from it, the reality of having to make sacrifices for work, for life. And, you know, if you need to get a project done way sooner than it actually needs to be done, then you're going to sacrifice parts of your life to be able to do that. If you need to climb to the next role or the next level faster than anybody else, you're going to have to sacrifice parts of your life to be able to do that. And but if you're if you're comfortable with maybe not being the best at that moment necessarily, then you get to have parts of your life back. It sort of felt like, and I hadn't made that sort of connection before for myself, because like we were just talking about, I thought it was always like drive, keep driving.
And you had been the person who was like successful before other people who rose up the ranks fast. Like that had been the way you did it, right?
Yeah, I had some success, done pretty well in that career. But by the end, it really got me to a place where I wasn't happy with anything, because it wasn't just my work I was unhappy with. I was unhappy with everything. So when we talked for the first time, had the consultation, I mean, I was surprised by I want to say just like quietness. Like it was just me and you're giving me your full attention. And it was like, there wasn't Instagram followers, and there wasn't private jets, and there wasn't Tony Robbins, and there wasn't all this
Unfortunately, I don't have a private jet. Yeah.
Not yet. Yeah. But I could, it was just really relatable and accessible, and it was different than I expected in that way.
The quietness. Ooh, that lives in my body when you say that. Like we just want the space to be seen and held. And that's a good one. Did you have any thoughts? Because I ask these questions, just say it the third person way, just because I think like a lot of people like don't know anything about coaching. And so it's interesting to explore like what your thoughts were and then what they become. Like, did you have any expectations? Like, what did you expect coaching to be like?
I don't think I'm like unique in this way, because I hear it a lot also with my clients or people I'm consulting with, but I expected a coach to tell me what to do, fix my life for me. And I understand why that's attractive, because like I just want like the blueprint, and then you do some of it for me and I'll do a little bit, but this is like buying a new life or a new mindset, and I mean, you showed me, and I understand the value now of like, you're not doing this work for me. I know you're not withholding information or points of view or tips like we talked about before.
I'll give you my tips when I got them.
You're not stingy on the tips if you got them, and that if they can be helpful, but only if they can be helpful, and not in a way that points me towards a direction that may not actually be true to the direction I need to go in, or that's taking into account all the nuances and subtleties and deepness of my sort of reality or my way of life.
Okay, this is great. This is getting to the before and after, but let's talk. So that's like the sort of like you arriving into coaching. Like as we started working together, do you remember, and I know it can be hard to remember things chronologically, but what are some of the first things that you remember being like, oh, this was like helpful, or this is a useful insight or a different way of moving through the world that came up for you?
One of the first things that I really remember was like just taking a break during the workday. I mean, I was at this leadership position, managing teams of younger folks, more junior folks who had a lot of like tasks to do for their craft. Some parts of that craft I knew really well and I knew the details of, and other parts of that craft I didn't know so well. Yet I felt like I needed to, make sure my inbox was cleared out, that every email was attended to, that I knew everything that was going on, even if I didn't know exactly what that was. I was so tied to my inbox that I really felt like I couldn't leave my job. And that was my idea of work, my definition of work at the time, which doesn't make me a very effective, energized sort of leader.
You had to be like doing something at all times in order for it to be a good work day.
Yeah. So one of the things I think we talked about early on was literally taking a break. And I think that showed up in the form of taking walks, which I like to do with my dog in the middle of the day, and like finding peace around doing that, getting over like some guilt or some feeling like I was, skipping out on my job or not doing my job, and being okay with that, but it's almost like I needed permission to be able to do that. Like I wasn't going to come to that realization on my own.
Well, I was going to dig in on this, right? Because I think like you're a smart person. I'm sure it's like it wasn't like you've never thought of the idea that one
Sure.
could take a break, right?
Yeah.
But like, and I'm sure lots of people who are going to listen to this have had the idea that they could take a break, but they're probably not. So like what made the difference for you? Because there were probably also some thoughts, I think, because I remember us talking about certain beliefs and thoughts you had. Like what shifted even for that made you, or I don't even know if you remember, but that made it possible? Was it just the permission, or like what was it, do you think?
Yeah. I remember us having a conversation around, what my job was actually paying me for.
I remember this one. Yeah. Like, what is your job?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my job was to add value to my clients and my teams. And I got to the point where it was like not necessarily the hours worked. And I appreciated that because I realized too that I was spending hours doing nothing effective in my role, and that they were still paying me nonetheless, and coming to the realization that taking a break or resting in some form was actually going to make me better at my job, better at my role, more effective.
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. And like, I remember there was like a time, like you pushed back against that. And then there was a time when you believed that, like, oh yeah, my job, it doesn't have to be a certain number of hours. It is about my value and how can I maximize? Like when you believe that, you can take different action than you would allow yourself before.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I love that one. Any other ones that felt big to you or medium-sized?
This was like small potatoes in the scheme of my life, I think, but it's like stuck with me oddly, I think, throughout. And this was not in the beginning necessarily. This was like later on. So there was like still work to be done, and I think it was around my dog like getting water like all over the floor. Like constantly every day, multiple times a day, and how I just like I just couldn't accept it. And you called it by name. You were like, it's okay, so you can't accept the reality of like what's going on in your life right now. And it was like really not a big deal, but it was driving me crazy at the same time that I would have to like constantly be cleaning up this dog water, or that I would just leave it there to like not be cleaned up and have my cats run through it instead every day, dirty up the floors. And I think accepting that reality in the form that it's like, okay. And that's a big, broad like thing to do, like accept reality, for like a situation, big or small like that. So the way we like put that into practice, I remember, is like breaking it down into what that reality looked like. Because I wasn't really facing that either, when I like was fighting against these ideas that felt really big without actually like lifting up the hood and understanding the details. It was just too much. It was too much for me to handle at that time, unfortunately. And so we like broke it down by time. It was like, well, okay, what do you need to make this better? How much time do you actually need to spend making it better? And what are some of the things under your control that you can apply here and make it not so terrible? Once I saw the truth of that, and how small those details actually were, it's like you buy a mop, you buy a new like washable rug, you take literally 2 minutes, each day, to mop up the floor, little 30-second increments or whatever. And then it was like, oh my God, that's like way easier than it used to be for some reason.
Yeah, well, you had a lot of frustration, I remember, about the cats, and the cats were like the dogs were getting all in your grill. Well, and I think there was two things. It was like you had the thought, and oh my gosh, I've had thoughts of like this in my own life, which is like, it shouldn't be this way.
Yeah.
Versus like, no, this is exactly how it was always going to be. I have pets. This is what it is to have pets. And like the thought, which is like, this is way too hard, or it's taking up way too much of my time. And it sounds like it went to like, no, I just buy a mop.
Mhm.
Like this isn't, we talked about like how much time are you going to spend or like what tools or, whatever. Like it's, I when your brain feels like confused, then it can feel totally overwhelming too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were there any like blind spots that you had to yourself that you feel like you became more aware of during coaching?
I can't name any, like, I know that there are. I mean, the stuff we just talked about as well, I think was part of that. My like particularness for things to be certain ways, I think really sort of came to the forefront in a lot of our conversations. And whereas before I knew I was like an uptight guy, but I didn't know I was maybe like that, such a like at the mercy of it constantly, like my routines, my expectations for things that were always high, and that didn't necessarily like need to be that way. Allowed me to sort of relax, drop my shoulders a little bit, and challenge my thinking, I think.
Yeah. What do you think were some of your routines that changed or like let you relax more?
Yeah, I'm starting to try to understand what my the value is that I can give to people, and like leaning into that more than like the, I don't know, some sort of like superficial substance. I'm thinking about it in the forms of like being around people and conversations that like I feel I need to participate in, and talking just to talk, doing a thing just to do a thing, you know. Whereas I think I've found some peace around like not having to contribute for the sake of contributing, and and being able to offer value by just listening, and be be present. So I don't know if that exactly answers your questions about my routines, but it's been on my mind a lot lately with people.
Yeah, I love that for you, of like not feeling like you need to show up, but you can show up in a way that feels authentic to you.
Yeah, right.
I guess the last question I wanted to ask you in this kind of like category of questions was like, you came in feeling like really burnt out, feeling super tired, and you made this comment about like how you're working to work, or you're thinking thoughts about like what other changes did you notice? Because I think a lot of people struggle with like changing their work habits. Like what other changes did you notice in terms of how you approached work or thought about work or feelings you had about work?
Yeah. I think the rest one, to go back to that one, was a really big eye opener for me. And I don't know if I mean like rest for rest's sake, but like rest in a way that actually makes you better at work. Actually adds more value. I saw it always as like detracting, taking away my ability to do this thing or getting more done, and never thought about it as additive. And we sort of got to that point together too, where I was able to see how it made me better at my job, more effective, and gave time back, actually, because I was able to do the things that I needed to do. I was able to prioritize better, get through things faster and more intelligently now that I had more energy and brain power. And then I just like enjoyed my life more as well, and that had like some pretty large impacts on my work. By the end of my job, when I ended up leaving that career, I could have stayed like pretty easily, because
We
things
had a
were
lot
like,
of conversations about that. Yeah.
things were pretty good because I'd made those adjustments. And I mean, I chose to leave regardless, and for different reasons other than like I hate this job, I can't stand it anymore.
You could just leave because you wanted to, because
I
you wanted
left
something
because I
different.
wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I want to underline something you said in the previous thing, which I think is something that a lot of people need to hear, which is like sometimes the rest can mean that your whole workday gets shorter, despite the thought that you actually lose time. You came back and your brain was just sharper and better able to prioritize and handle problems. Like that's what you're saying. It felt like to you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I had never thought of it as being able to help me in that way. I thought it was almost like being lazy,
Yeah.
somehow like I had that connotation, but we really shattered it. And so that's a question I ask people now too, is like, how can, taking a break or taking a vacation or resting in some form actually help you in this XYZ other thing that you want to do, work or something else.
Yeah. I know. I love that. That's such a good one. So,
Hmm.
so good.
Hmm.
Well, tell me, after having been coached, like, how was it like? You've already touched on it a little bit, and when you were talking about sort of like wanting me to fix your life, but how was it like what you expected, and how was it not like what you expected?
Hmm. Like I expected. I mean, working with you, I think you show up to your consultations the same way you show up to all your coaching sessions. Like you
That's
really
helpful feedback.
you
Yeah.
stay, you stay like really consistent is what I mean. And so I think like that was helpful too, because that wouldn't have worked otherwise, I don't think,
Yeah.
if it was like I mean, obviously like a bait and switch sort of situation, or if you were like showing up really high some days and differently other days. And not that you
Sure.
weren't like having your own feelings and your own experience, but just the person that you were was always the same. So having that sort of consistency was really helpful for me. And in the ways that it wasn't, or it was different than I expected, I think like, and I mean, you may have said this in the consultation too, that like, hey, like you're doing the work, like, and not in these words, but like, hey, you're doing the work, like, but I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna, point the flashlight, basically. You do the digging. Uh, it took me a while for that to like sink in, because I think I really wanted you to tell me what to do, and and you wouldn't. You would ask the questions. It was, and you'd get me thinking about ways and reflecting on my thoughts and my behavior in a way that I just really wasn't doing on my own, and that we're not really trained to do. I don't have another platform in my life to really do that. I can share with friends and family, but it's different
Yeah.
because what comes back is a lot of like what I said, but from their perspective,
Yeah.
um, whereas working with you, working with a coach is really like reflective. You're not necessarily coloring it, you're just pointing me sort of in the next or allowing me to go in the next direction.
I really landed with that. Like, I think our friends and family like love us, and some of them are good listeners. And
Yeah.
like, also the advice they give is like very colored.
Hmm.
And like, it's just, we can't, someone who's really neutral and like just wants what we want for us it's a very quite different experience.
Yeah. I think instinctively we want to help those people we care about in our
Yeah.
lives. So we're automatically going to solutions, right?
Yeah.
And like my solution for you, Katie, might not be like what's actually going to work for you. It might actually like not do you any good at all.
Yeah.
Um, so getting out of that sort of like um, subjectivity, I think, can be really
Yeah.
useful, because then it trains me to be able, essentially, to like be able to coach myself
Yeah.
when I'm faced, with real situations. And like I'm practicing problem solving on my own. I'm practicing thinking more objectively about my thoughts and understanding, why things are coming up and how they're coming up and what are the other alternatives. Because like when I'm only looking through my lens, I really have the blinders on. I can't see things for what they are, because the stories going on in my head are the same all the time, and they're mine, so they sound like the truth. I
Yeah.
take them at face value. Um,
Yeah.
when I see them from not another person's perspective, but from the outside, then I'm actually able to make a decision on them, if it's true, if it's helping me or not.
Yeah. Well, and I think I want to circle back on something you said earlier. You said sort of like you were sort of hoping I would just like fix it for you. And I think
Hmm.
probably a lot of people want that, right? And like they might be listening to you being like, oh, but it's kind of a pain that she didn't like do it for you.
Yeah.
Like what
It
is
is.
like what are your ultimate feelings about that I didn't
Yeah.
do it for you?
Like, I mean, even now I'd be like, yeah, I'd love to pay someone to come in and fix my life. And those people probably exist, I don't know if they're coaches, they'd be like consultants,
Yeah.
which are hired specifically to like fix your problems or tell you what to do,
Yeah.
or even a trainer at the gym. But even a trainer at the gym can't do the sit-ups for you,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't do you any good to pay a trainer to do sit-ups, right? Like it doesn't work like that. The
Push your
osmosis.
body into the position it needs to go in.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. So ultimately I see the value, and I'm grateful for what coaching is and how you coached me, which was letting me solve my own problems.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and this as a coach yourself, like I honestly don't know the answer to what you should do, though I can give you lots of ideas and guidance and questions and tools and things.
Right.
How could I possibly know? Even if you hired a consultant, like you might hate their answer.
Right.
You might have like paid all the money and then you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
I hate this ebook that they gave me about what I should do with my life.
Right. Yeah. Because coaching really values and honors like each person's unique perspective and their expertise on themselves. And I think that's really cool and doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, like allowing people to have that sovereignty to know fundamentally what they want from their lives.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you also referenced that you have been in therapy a bunch, which I know you have, and you are now a coach yourself, and you were coached by me. Like, what is your perspective on like how they felt different? And obviously, I always like to people ask me this a lot, and like I'm sure you get asked this too. And I like to say there's lots of kinds of coaches and lots of kinds of therapists, and so it's hard to ever definitively answer this question. But from your experiential experience. That's redundant, but from your experience, what was that like? Like, how did they feel different as a client?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I never like to blanket like the two either, but from my experiential experience, I would say the therapy never felt like we were driving towards something. And it sort of lacked the organization that I feel like a coaching conversation tends to have. Working with you, I mean, you wouldn't set the agenda for me, but we had agreed on a couple topics or goals or whatever, things to explore, at the outset of our working together that kind of helped keep me focused on what it is I was going after. I used to walk in a therapist's office, and I don't suffer from mental illness or a diagnosed mental illness, at least. I would go to therapists because I just didn't feel good or things didn't feel right. And that's was a hard thing, I think, to explore if you just walk in saying that and there's no sort of like agenda sort of to dive into there. We didn't go. I think we would go a little deeper, but talking about it for me didn't translate to actions, I think. And not every, conversation needs to do that, but I would do that for a year, where talking about it wasn't really resolving the problems on the ground for me. And, when I was being coached by you, I felt like we had actionable steps most of the time at the end. Some things required them, some things didn't require them, and sometimes we wouldn't have them, or I wasn't ready to take action on it yet too. I needed to like absorb, some of the ideas and things that we talked about, and come to, some like next steps later on. But that to me feels like was sort of the big difference.
Yeah, that's such a great, I think that's a great way of saying it. Well, I feel like you've referred to it, but just so I've like completed this circle for whoever listens to this, like, how would you say you felt as we finished our coaching time together? Like what changes did you notice in yourself?
Yeah. Well, we sort of had like two legs, right? So at the end of the first one, it was like, man, I actually like I'm like much better at my job at this role, at least now, than I'd been in the past 2 years. More effective. I can feel that. I'm getting feedback like that from my team. And like I enjoy my life because I'm comfortable shutting down the computer, at 6 or 6:30 or 7 or whatever is appropriate for the day, and no more than that. And then I don't think about it, and I'm not concerned with it. And just having peace around that, and just a more comfortable day. I don't know. I felt better. I felt more confident in my role than I'd ever been, and like I liked my job more. I couldn't remember the last time I liked my job as much as I did then. But I mean, we were like parallel pathing things too, and so I decided to leave to pursue some other things anyway. And so we sort of picked up again 4 or 5 months into that journey too. And then it was like a whole new batch of stress and anxiety and fears and stuff and goals too. And so our time together too, by that time, I felt like I was able to reflect on all the things that I'd done in that year so far. And it was way more than I expected. It was way better than I expected. And like I had gotten more done and had more success in starting my business.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify. You've become a coach and
Yeah.
you've launched a coaching business and you've coached tons of clients this year. Yeah.
And that was, I mean, it was beyond sort of what I expected to have done, I think. So thank you for that. And
thank you. You did all the work, as we discussed.
That's right. But you helped me get there. I like to think about like coaching too as like the bumpers on like a bowling alley, sort of keeping you in line in that way, not rolling you down there, but keeping you in the lane. You know what I mean?
That lands in my body so much when you say that, because I think we've all had this experience of just like, oh no, my bowling ball is
big time
way over there. And I don't even know how to get back to the lane. And we're like spiraling off. And it's like, if you could just stay in the lane, how much can you get done?
Yeah.
If you can prevent your brain from spiraling, because once that ball starts rolling, you could be like 20 feet away. And it takes so much momentum to get you back. Ooh, that's a good one, Matt. I'm really into it.
Oh, glad you like it. Yeah. So, I mean, by the end, we knocked down more pins than I expected, right?
Yeah.
And I also felt like I was on a track towards doing the things that I wanted to do. It was like building this pitch deck, starting to perform outreach to these businesses and these agencies about coaching their people, and then continuing my coaching education and making sure my business had a regular clientele coming through it, and all of those things were met.
Yeah, they were. Well, if there's one thing, or it could be more than one thing, that you want to there are people who are going to listen to this, hopefully, what is something you would like for them to take away, whether it's an insight you had from coaching that you were people need to know, or just about what it's like to be coached, or what do you feel like people should take away from this?
I think I came to you a couple times and I was like, I don't know if this is appropriate, or I don't know if we can talk about this, when it came to feelings or anything to do with my relationship with my wife, or different things that were more sensitive, they were
you were maybe this is a therapy topic.
Yeah. Almost this thought that only the most vulnerable, sensitive topics are reserved for therapy. And many of them, some of them are, and maybe not even many of them, but some of them are. But coaching covers such a wide area of things to talk about, from our regular human emotions to how we interact with and communicate and love and show up for people in our lives, people we love, people we really care about, and people we don't really care about, and finding ways
talked
to
about some of those too. Yeah.
Definitely. Finding ways to find some peace and acceptance and feel better about that stuff. So, things that we don't want in our lives aren't controlling us so much or affecting us so much. And so, yeah, I mean, I was surprised, I think, in the end, at how deep this can go, and the range of things we can talk about, and how effective you and coaches can be in those realms, by by applying like the same sort of philosophy to each of those different topics, no matter how sort of seemingly different they are.
I think that is such a great point, because I think there can be this belief, which it sounds like, you had to some degree. I feel like I have lots of clients who have, which is like, oh, if it involves like emotions or like something that feels kind of vulnerable and like I might fall apart a little bit, like then it's not coaching specific, because coaching has to be this like, I don't know, like actionable, like surface or like less deep and gnarly thing. And it's like, actually, there's nothing wrong with any of those emotions and nothing weird about them. And I'm not fazed at all by them. I think that's just part of the human experience. And like, we can coach on that the same way we coach on just like your work day. It's all relevant and real. I'm so glad you said that. I think that will help someone for sure.
Good.
Okay. So what do you want people to know about, if they feel really inspired by your story and your background, about how to learn more about you or maybe work with you?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. But anyone can reach out on my website, mattbrunercoaching.com. There's a lot of information there about what coaching is and is not, how I work, my process, and some other folks who have worked with me who had a good experience. If you happen to be a business owner or working in marketing and want to get business going for your colleagues or your leadership team or anyone in your company, I would love to talk with you, because I've got a lot of experience in the corporate world. I've worked in every one of those roles, down from the lowest sort of task-oriented role up through middle management and then executive leadership. And I think there's a lot of value for coaching in the world right now for exactly what we just said. People need help, not just in their work, but in their lives as well. If you're in 100% digital sort of environment, it's tougher to be engaged nowadays. There's perks, I think, to being able to work from home, work from anywhere. But if you're finding people that are struggling with their careers, and you're unsure how your junior staff is developing, and you have fear of keeping people, especially your best and brightest on your teams, those are the people, those are the teams, those are the companies I want to work with. So mattbrunercoaching.com. And you can reach out for a consultation.
Love it. We'll put it in the show notes too. Yeah. And you have so much like deep, very specific subject matter experience in that field. So it makes you a really interesting coach. And you're just a really thoughtful, deep coach. So
yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Matt.
Thank you too, Katie. I appreciate it.
If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.